Hey, good evening, everyone. It's Andrew with episode 6 in the true story of how I became the All American Boy. Well, I think I might have goofed up in the end there of the last episode when I said I'd tell you something interesting about my service in Vietnam. So I thought what I would do is tell you a short story about the most scared I've ever been in my life. And it was the night flight to QuiNhon. And there we were in Nha Trang, sitting on a plethora of helicopter parts. And we got a radio call that our operation up north was in trouble because they had messed up with their tail rotor hubs, and they had a helicopter that couldn't fly anymore without main rotor blades, and et cetera, et cetera. And so the supply officer came to me and said, "Hey, you got these things?" And I said, "Sure." And so we packed up a helicopter, a slick, and the main rotor blades on a Huey are big, and the only way that we could transport them, well, I guess we could have, attached them to the skids somehow, but the solution set was to take those main rotor blades with a forklift and put them half in and half out. So there we were with a slick with these main rotor blades. Couldn't close the doors. So anyhow, we take off in this ninth flight, and we have to go to a remote base called QuiNhon, which was just about at the maximum range of fuel for the Huey. It was a long flight, especially at night, and so off we flew from Nha Trang going to QuiNhon, and we're trying to fix a desperate problem for them. And it started to storm, and the wind was blowing, and the pilot and the aircraft commander, frankly, they're having a pretty hard time keeping that thing straight and level. In fact, it was impossible to keep it straight and level. It kept whipping across the sky, up and down. Well, anyhow, traveling, the weather got worse and worse, and it was raining like a son of a. And I'm saying over the intercom, can't we put this thing down? And they said, no, we can't put it down. This area below us is controlled by the VC. And just about that time, to give extra emphasis to his words, there was a burst of green tracers. And the thing about the war was that we used red tracers, and the bad guys used green tracers. And well, anyhow, to make a long story short, the pilot says to the aircraft commander, "No, I see green tracers coming up. We can't land here." And I'm thinking, oh my God, of course we can't land here. We got to keep going. But the wind kept getting more and more turbulent, and we were more and more buffeted, and it was really terrifying, and it was cold. It was really unpleasant. I had my flight jacket, my nylon flight jacket on that was all silver on the outside and all neon orange on the inside in case somebody needs to rescue you from a crash below. Well, I'm thinking of, we're not going to survive this. And so uh, as the wind got more and more turbulent, we started to experience an effect like a pendulum, and the Huey was going back and forth in the air, back and forth in the air. And about that time, the chains that were holding the main rotor blades down on the floor of the Huey, they went sprong, and all of a sudden, those main rotor blades were loose, and they started to slither around on the floor of the helicopter. Boy, oh boy, that was a scary sight. And then the one main rotor blade started to slide out of the helicopter because the floor was all wet. It was slippery, and I thought, oh man, we're going to lose that main rotor blade right out the door. And then the other, as we flopped through the sky, the other main rotor blade started to slide out the other side. So all of a sudden, here we are, this helicopter is dangerous to fly in the first place, and we're in the middle of what feels like a hurricane. It was a terrible thunderstorm. And we've got these main rotor blades trying to escape. And I learned later that what they called that situation was operator-induced oscillation. So in trying to keep it straight and level, they'd actually set up this pendulum swinging back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And every time we would go to the maximum, the blades would move. And then I'd go back the other way, and the blades would move. And I thought, oh, we're losing it. And I try and grab those main rotor blades, pull them back in, and, I was supposed to be wearing a seatbelt because the helicopter, I couldn't get the main rotor blades if I was wearing a seatbelt. So naturally, I popped out of the belt, and I'm wrestling with those. The main rotor blades come in these long, big, heavy aluminum boxes with padding. Those main rotor blades are actually pretty fragile. They're made with paper. Well, it would be easier if I had some sort of an animation to demonstrate this to you. But I'm trying to pull on these main rotor blades and get them in the helicopter, and the oscillation is getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So finally, we get up to this kind of an angle in the helicopter, and the back, and then even higher. And I thought, oh, man, this is just like when I was a little kid playing on the swing set at the playground, and I had visions of going up and over, up and over. Well, there are a lot of people who say I'm a damn liar because it's impossible for a Huey to actually recover from being upside down. But I will tell you that we went up, up, and over. And as we were right at the top of that oscillation, it just was like magic that I had a hold of both of those main rotor blades, and I pulled with all of my might, and they both came in. I mean, they both came back to where they were supposed to be, and the helicopter was back in balance. And And then we were back to flying straight and narrow, straight and level is what I meant to say. And I was talking to the aircraft commander who had actually been flying the thing during that oscillation. And Lieutenant Dan. Lieutenant Dan didn't say nothing. He wasn't a lieutenant either. He was a warrant officer. And he didn't say, well, it turns out that he had passed out. I don't know whether his heart had just given out on him or whether he got scared to death or what had happened, but he was unconscious in the seat. And I was yelling into the microphone in the PA or in the intercom system. He's unconscious. He's unconscious. You need to fly this thing. And he didn't want to fly because he'd been scared to death before the oscillation started, which is why the aircraft commander took over from the pilot. So the pilot had to fly. And after we stopped oscillating, well, it wasn't 20 minutes later until we had arrived at QuiNhon, and we landed. It must have been midnight. It was dark, and we were the only people alive, the only people awake, and it seemed like we were the only people alive, because that place was shut down tight as a drum. And well, I just don't know what else to say. I think I'll just call this episode and thank y'all for watching, and I hope y'all will tune in again for episode 7, where I'll talk to you about going from QuiNhon back up for another stint at Tokyo FOB. And my second stint at Tokyo FOB was just the saddest moment I ever experienced in Vietnam up to that point. So it's the story of Lieutenant Tran. And so anyhow, see you next time. Thanks for watching, and come back soon. Bring a friend, and don't forget to breathe. Peace, and peace out.